Today, I want to just have a coach chat, honestly, where like I've just got a few questions for these gentlemen just to see what their experiences have been that make them uh, good coaches, pretty much. So I don't know. Both of you have been on the podcast in the past, but who would like to introduce themselves first, just to let everyone know who you are?
My name is Jesus Flores. I'm originally from Colombia in South America. I trained to be a, let's say, traditional English language teacher, but I have spent 15 or 16 years perfecting my own American accent. And I'll give you some insights, some of my own experiences trying to pick up the accent and what that means and what I think that could mean for you.
Yeah, Felipe, tell us about yourself, buddy.
I'm Felipe Joy. I'm originally from Brazil. And as a matter of fact, I've never stepped foot out of Brazil, though I managed to learn English. And my experience as an English teacher is dates back to 2012. So it's been a while.
Both of you have spent well over a decade working on your English, sharpening your skills. What sparked that journey? And what has kept that fire going?
My interest in the language itself, I believe, as best as I can remember, goes all the way back when I was probably 7 or 8 years old. I think that it stemmed from watching a movie from the 90s called Independence Day. That's the first, or that's a clear memory that I have of enjoying something to the extent that I wanted to learn that language. I must have watched that a bazillion times by the time I became a teenager. And to the point that I actually memorized some of the lines from the script. And I used to play around with them, trying to, I guess, make it sound like I was in the movie. It's kind of silly, but that's actually a very clear moment for me. And that basically starts me on a language learning trajectory. And then the interest in the accent comes around the time I was 18. I had this moment when I wanted to be able to do two things. I wanted people to take me seriously when I spoke English. And I also wanted to, in a way, differentiate myself from the rest, kind of like give myself an edge over others. And the way that I reasoned at the time was that in order to do that, I needed to do a deep dive into pronunciation. It was never a desire to fool people into thinking that I was a native speaker. That never really was a goal of mine. That has happened in the past, and it's a great feeling.
And how does that feel when you can speak for so long and nobody would guess that you aren't a native speaker?
It's been a long time since this happened, actually, because I guess after you speak in a way that people are used to, that's something that basically just disappears from their radar. And they're not really trying to think about where you're from. They're more focused on your message. I guess for me, one time that I remember this happening was when I first visited the US, and this was way back now in 2013. I went to a teachers conference um, in Dallas, Texas, and I was at the train station, I believe, and a random guy approached me and asked me something about schedules or something. But we engaged in a very short or brief conversation. And in the midst of that conversation, I mentioned that I was visiting the city to go to a teachers conference. And obviously, I guess I mentioned that I was coming from another country as a teacher. And that's when he said, "Wow, you sound just like one of us." I thought, I felt amazing. And I felt that was a moment where it was confirmation that what I had been doing for a few years already was legit. This is how Americans really talk. And then that sense of accomplishment, kind of like a feather in your cap moment. That's it, really.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's really cool to hear. And I mean, Felipe, for yourself, you've accomplished some incredible things for someone who hasn't even left Brazil. If you spent some time there, I'll bet you would probably close that gap, much like how Jesus has. So how did you achieve such a high level of proficiency? What's worked for you?
Some parts of Jesus' story, sounds, those parts sound just like mine, especially when it comes to at the very beginning, the thing with the movie. For me, it was Titanic back in 1997. So that was like the first spark. It was the first movie I've ever watched in English. And then, like, for the very first time, I had that moment with the language and I fell in love immediately. So fast forward, a couple of years, then I got like really interested in the language, studying by myself with dictionaries. So I would say that most of my career as an English educator is like, I would say 90% I've been more like self-taught than like learning from courses or etc. But specifically when it comes to accent training, when I was working at the language school, I mean, I was kind of incentivized not to have like an American or British accent because there is this culture. I don't know what it's like for you, Jesus, in Colombia, but down here in Brazil, there's this culture of your accent tells your story, tells who you are. You should preserve that. And that kind of made me blind. So only after I left that school and then I started to, do my own research, I could notice how different it is for a native English speaker. They interact with someone that has, similar accent compared to someone who has a strong influence of their first language. So that was like 2 years ago, just around the same time I met Pat.
I want to just say something about that right there. As far as I can remember, the attitude is basically the same. It doesn't really matter what you sound like as long as you make yourself understood. That's a very common feeling, and I think it's almost like axiomatic at this point. There's been some changes, let's say, in my view, when it comes to, let's say, how important it may be to sound more native like. A long time ago now, this might have been 2010 or 11, I heard about a research article that was put out by some university here in the US. And it was something about how a foreign accent affected your credibility as a teaching assistant in an English language education, let's say, medium. The gist of it was something along the lines that a very strong or marked foreign accent made you less credible or, let's say, believable when it came to imparting instruction in a classroom. And we're talking about university classroom setting. So that to me was influential at the time because, in a way, it was sort of external confirmation that there may be something to this idea of wanting to sound more native like, whatever that means, actually, because even there's been a shift in the ELT field. And so that leads me to my second moment, which was, I'm sure you know what the CEFR is. There was a major revision that came out in 2020, and it moved away from the language of native speaker, and it shifted completely to competent speaker. That, in my view, was earth shattering because for years the native speaker has been the yardstick. But now, something as influential as the CEFR has now shifted tremendously from that, let's say, old standard. I still believe that people can do what I have done and what you have done too, Felipe.
And I've had the situation with a student, and then she had a really thick accent. Not only it had influence from Portuguese, but also from the state where I'm from. So it's like an accent inside another accent. And it was really thick. I mean, when I use my accent in Portuguese, people from other states usually, sometimes they will laugh and they'll make fun of it, but that doesn't really matter because I'm speaking Portuguese. We can understand each other. But if you bring that specific accent into English, how is it possible that a native English speaker will understand a person from this very specific state inside of Brazil?
It compounds that challenge. I absolutely agree with you there. All I'm saying is that if you pay attention to the tenor of the message spread around from major influencers, and I'm thinking of obviously teachers on YouTube with huge audiences, the basic tenor of the message is that clear pronunciation does not necessarily equate with, let's say, an easy to understand accent. And so I think that in a way, we have let's say, an additional challenge of motivating people to go that extra mile. That's what I'm saying, because that's what you hear from most people these days. It doesn't really matter what accent you have. It's all about intelligibility, comprehension. I mean, you know the script.
Would you say that compared to the past or compared to the standards that you set for yourself, would you say that the bar has been kind of lowered in that sense? Like maybe just to make it easier for people so people feel more accepting of their abilities, they said, yeah, well, we're going to lower what your expectations of yourself, what you can accomplish. We're going to tell you you can accomplish less.
I definitely feel that way right now. What we are doing in a way kind of goes or is going against the grain. I'm just going to give one quick example here. I follow some podcasts, here and there, continuing to practice listening. And there was this IELTS preparation podcast, I believe, that I used to listen to. And there was this examiner slash instructor, and his foreign accent was quite noticeable. Nothing against, obviously, this person. They are definitely well versed in their field. But considering that the standard of, you know, curriculum design is the CEFR, and it used to be the typical language of native speaker benchmark, to see something like this, in a way, you know, kind of solidifies this opinion that I hold, that in a way we're kind of going against the grain. And, I do believe that the standard has, the bar has been lowered. I'm sure there's a lot of reasons why. I've done some thinking of my own or reflecting of my own there, but I can tell you more about that later.
Okay. And how about you, Felipe? Do you feel like there's a lower standard of English now than what you would like to see?
I was talking to this guy the other day, and he's at this prestigious university, it's local, but it's prestigious. And he takes English, and then he said something like, English is global, that it's important that you keep your accent regardless of English spoken by native English speakers.
Do you think it's something that limits people's capabilities to think that way, or do you think it enforces them? What do you think?
I think it depends on the person. I feel like if the person doesn't really do their own research, and then they go out there and try to compare how different it is, like an American accent from a British English accent, and like what does that sound like when a native English speaker makes a vowel sound, like compared to when I make that sound. And if the person is not tuned in, to all those details, maybe it's gonna be, bad for them. I mean, it's yeah, in that sense, it's limiting.
Folks, this is just a quick message to remind you to subscribe to the Accent Training Podcast. If you haven't already, you don't want to miss a second of this accent training experience, and you want to be updated whenever I've got new content out for you. So if you haven't subscribed, hit subscribe now.
Using these, with the way that you guys look at things, that's exactly what people who are listening to this episode are also, many of them are looking at it that way, because people who are listening to this episode and people who will listen to all the details of this episode and even take notes are like, some of the top performing people, because they're people who are like picking up every bit of information that they can get, and they want to learn from your experiences. How do you feel as a non-native English speaker teaching what you've learned, passing that on to someone else? Do you feel like that can be done? And I'd just like to ask, what ways do you feel it can be done best? And whoever wants to take that question first, go right ahead.
In a way, I definitely feel that because of my condition as a non-native, for a lot of people that are looking for these services, that is kind of a, make or break. And I know that there will be many people out there that will not even consider coming to me because the truth is, I'm not a native speaker of English. I believe I'm as competent as any of them out there. But for some, that is it's a big deal. And I can't really, compete against that, or I can't change that. By the same token, I'm my own success story. And for some, that will resonate more powerfully. This can be done, and I will show them, everything that I have done, my formative experiences, and so on.
What would you say would be like a good method that someone would be able to use to pick things up, like something that they can even start doing today, a habit that changed things for you, possibly?
The first thing that comes to mind would be listen to how often we are reducing syllables in spoken English. I would start there. I would first point that out to the person. This works better, in my opinion, if I'm speaking to other native speakers of Spanish, Portuguese, and perhaps another related language, noticing those reductions that happen all the time. I would start there, or I would offer that as something that you can start listening for. Once that is briefly pointed out to you, you're not going to stop hearing it.
It's tough to hear things that aren't there. That's what I find is the toughest thing for people, right? Because you're right, there's a lot of reductions, and it's tough to hear things, like to hear sounds that people aren't making. So, I mean, what's worked for you, or like, what have you done to be able to listen for that rhythm, listen for that contrast in the stress, the reductions? What do you feel has been effective?
Extensive listening is the first thing that I can think of there. Around the same time that I started to acquire an American accent, I did a lot of listening by way of Japanese anime, dubbed in English, in American English. And so I was learning all these things and confirming them the more that I listened. I think that acquisition goes hand in hand with listening. Obviously, you want to listen to material that you find somewhat entertaining. Those two things go hand in hand. I spent hours listening very carefully, more closely than I do now, obviously. But initially, I was listening for all of those different building blocks that I was learning and studying. That's what I can say there.
Listening for that contrast from strong to weak syllables, and start to catch words that people aren't pronouncing really clearly, because you may have been taught, if you're a Spanish speaker, you would have been taught to pronounce every vowel as it's written. And maybe you have an accent on the vowel, so you'll pronounce it a little stronger than the others. But the vowels have a pretty steady pattern. Not in English. English is a big mess. So great habit there to develop, Jesus. And Felipe, any thoughts? Like, if you were speaking to someone directly and you're like, all right, you have to make this life change. If you want to reach point B where you're speaking English with an American accent, what would that be?
Well, I have to agree with Jesus. So improve your listening above all. I mean, if you can't hear that sound, it's impossible to, reproduce it. So it all starts by understanding that it's there, even though, just like I said earlier, maybe you don't know it's there, but maybe making a comparison like, oh, this is the way, this is the way natives are pronouncing this word. Make a comparison with the way you would pronounce that. And then like, oh, that sounds different. So what can be done here? So this is when I started to get some feedback initially from an American friend. So for about 1 year. And then that's when I also took like those video courses, and including yours. So taking video courses can be really helpful. And then I moved on to the sessions, to the one-on-one sessions with you. And that was like the game changer.
Interesting. Okay, video courses. I like what you mentioned there. I mean, oh yeah, okay, number one, yeah, sure. I've got a video course for sale. But aside from that, I think what you're saying with listening and video courses, like video courses, if it's a good video course, it's going to focus on a few core concepts. You don't want to buy a video course of everything at once, because it's going to kind of overwhelm you with information, right? But if you get a good video course that's focusing on vowel sounds, or that's focusing on, English for tech, like for, the IT kind of workspace, then you've got to focus, and then you're listening for this specific context. I like how I think it's pretty cool. You're both coming from different languages, completely different experiences, and you both give the same answer. Listening is the key. Great answer, Jesus, on just listening for the patterns, and as Felipe mentioned as well, get some focus in there. Like what made you take that step, Felipe, to actually put some money down and you make it happen? Like, what made that happen for you? What changed that pattern and made you invest in accent training?
I had an argument with a former coworker, and then I remember there was like this meeting with all the teachers and the school coordinator. Then this coworker was really tough on me, and unfortunately, there was this American guy who was also a teacher over there, and then both of them attacked me. I was defending, like, okay, for me, it makes no sense to use Portuguese, as like, to use the sounds of Portuguese to speak English. And they were like, oh, but there is this author, he says you should keep your accent and etc. And maybe that I ended up quitting my job And maybe that was the trigger for me, like, oh, I believe there is a better way. I believe I can sound better, and I believe I can also help other people sound better and feel more confident with their English.
Felipe, just for a moment there now, you kind of started that story out right in the middle of the book. Could we turn back a few pages? What sparked that argument? What kind of made it, what got it to that point where you had two of your colleagues attacking you and it drove you to this? I'm just curious, like, what was the situation, as you recall, that
Mhm.
kicked things off there? Because that sounds like you're very passionate about this when you put it like that.
Oh, yeah. So I was pretty much sharing my experience with a student I had, and like I was sharing that I gave her some feedback at the end of the year, at the end of the school year. I was like, wow, your English is good. You can use grammar properly, your vocab, everything is fine, but maybe you should look at this. So that was the same person was using the accent from, our state, which is unique, and she was using it to speak English, and it sounded off. So that's after sharing that story, I got the attack.
So she was like, she had, you know, you could say the technical training down. It's like she had, if she were building a bicycle, she had all the pieces of the bicycle, and maybe she could probably ride the bicycle, but she couldn't race, and she wanted to race, kind of thing. She didn't want to just go for a ride down the lane. She wanted to compete. And you were telling her what it would take for her to get there, to be competitive. And they didn't like that? Who is this other teacher, and how did he get involved?
Well, there were two of them. So one of them is a really experienced teacher, and yeah, he's actually renowned in my city. I had that moment with a feedback, giving feedback to that student a couple weeks before. So there was only the two of us. And then in this meeting with all the teachers, I shared that story without revealing her name. So I said, I have this student, her English is good, she has the vocab, the grammar, but she needs to improve her accent.
Uh, okay, and they didn't like that. That's interesting.
Exactly.
I have not had anything close to that kind of experience. So I guess I've lived in an echo chamber forever.
One thing I'd like to ask about briefly is just kind of, how do you feel that you help people build confidence for real world situations?
Look for real life opportunities to apply what you're learning. I did a lot of that in my own journey. I started working on my American accent when I was 18. And I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to attend some international education fairs that would go to my home city. And the very first one that I attended was in 2009. And it was a fair of US university representatives going there to scout for potential new students. And I went to every single stand, and everybody understood me perfectly. I still remember that was one of my formative experiences. So seek them out. Do not be afraid. Apply that in the real world. That was real world for me. So I'm sure you can find something like that out there.
Seek out the opportunities. Don't wait for them to come to you. This Jesus, you were probably in Colombia at the time, I guess. Where
Yes,
you were?
I was. Yes.
Where
Yes,
they weren't hanging
exactly.
around your neighborhood. You had to go looking for them.
To be fair, I was quite apprehensive at the beginning by what was going to happen, but I went for it.
They didn't laugh you out of there and tell you to go
No,
home. I'll bet they listened, and I'll bet that you asked good questions. And Felipe, any thoughts, pieces of advice to send us off on?
Nowadays, with the internet, there's podcasts, there are a lot of YouTube channels, there are a lot of video courses. I mean, even with your phone, you can download an app, and you can have dozens of dictionaries, and there are so many tools nowadays that you can use to help you improve your English and sound better and more confident. You don't necessarily need to move or to travel abroad.
Very good. Very good. Well, this has been a great chat for today. Thank you very much for both of you for, taking time on this lovely Saturday afternoon to meet up so we can just get this information together and share it with everybody moving forward. Well, have a good one, guys.
Hey guys, looks like you made it all the way to the end of the lesson. You are the true 1%ers of accent training. Look, I know 1%ers who can make it halfway through a lesson, but making it all the way through, you guys are the best. And so I'd like to ask you specifically a question. Is it a priority for you to express yourself in English just as clearly and confidently as you do in your native language? Well, my friend, you're in luck. I have positions available for accent training, and I'm looking for the 1%ers who want to train hard to develop their English speaking for key professional interactions and networking. Now, you're thinking, I really want to train with this guy, and so I need to connect with you. Down below, there's a description box on this podcast episode. There's a link in it that says, Coach with me one-on-one. If you fill out the application there and I see that I can help you, my team will reach out to you in the next 24 hours. You can tell me what you need help with, what your goals are, and we're going to crush it together, my friend. I would love to see you get to the next level professionally. I know that you want the same thing, and I'd love to go with you on that journey. So right now, if you want to partner up with me, if you want to team up with me and go to the next level, I want you to go to the description box below right now, click on the link, fill out your information, and we'll talk to you in the next 24 hours. Let's do this.